Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan, back in Lansing, as you can see. No Lake Huron behind me today.
Well, welcome back, Brian, and thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm Sarah Miller, SBAM's Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. And today we're going to welcome one of our new members, Heartland Builders. Heartland Builders began building spec homes in 1997 in Greenville, Michigan. So welcome to Heartland and your team. We appreciate your membership. All right, so Brian, we have a few stories to get to today. Let's start off with kind of some breaking news from Friday. The Michigan Supreme Court ruled that minimum wage will not be on the ballot this November.
Yeah, and this, I think it's important because there's been a few things in the news on this to separate out that we're not talking about the famous adopt and amend case that is before the Michigan Supreme Court right now. We are expecting very shortly, probably this month, a decision on that adopt and amend case, which could potentially increase minimum wage. That is a separate question. There was a different case that had made its way up to the Supreme Court, which was a party that was asking the Supreme Court to compel the Board of Canvassers. These are the folks that two Republicans, two Democrats, it's always bipartisan, but gubernatorial appointed on the Board of Canvassers. They decide whether or not a question can be put on the ballot. And there was an effort to put an increase in the minimum wage on the ballot that would take it to $15 an hour and would also eliminate the tip credit and take that to $15 an hour. That there was a deadlock, a 2-2 deadlock on the at the Board of Canvassers. So in other words, it was not approved for the ballot. And so there was an effort to try to get the Supreme Court to force the force the Board of Canvassers to place it on the ballot. So the decision came down and was not close. There was in a concurring statement to the decision, Brian Zara noted that for the Supreme Court to get involved, that is an extraordinary remedy reserved for rare cases where a clear legal duty has been violated. So just a disagreement on the clarity of the language at the Board of Canvassers is not a big enough disagreement for the Supreme Court to evaluate and compel. He said, quote, "It is not the role of this court to second guess and question the administration of election disputes properly left to the bipartisan oversight of the Board of State Canvassers," end quote. So a bipartisan decision. I mean, Supreme Court technically not partisan, but in this case, there was some clarity that people from across the political spectrum on the Supreme Court felt that question shouldn't be advanced. By the way, when you have a question that you want to put before the people of the state of Michigan, you're going to try to change the Constitution or change the law, and you want to get signatures to make that happen, you can go to the Board of Canvassers ahead of time, this group of 4 people, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, submit language, and then they can certify it ahead of time. Before you go out and get all the signatures, they can certify it and say, yep, this is clear. If you get signatures on this question, we'll put it on the ballot. You can do that ahead of time. They did that ahead of time this time, but then they inexplicably changed the language that they got pre-approved. And they changed it in a way that made it apparently less clear or not clear enough to pass the clarity standard with 3 or more votes on the Board of Canvassers. So that has been set aside. There will not be a question on the ballot with respect to that. There was another item that seemed like it maybe had some legs to make it to the ballot, which was to overrule some environmental or some energy policy that was passed that would override local permitting decisions on siting of solar and wind energy projects around the state. So the state law changed and said, doesn't matter what local zoning says or local site use plans, those sorts of things, that Now the state's going to decide where these things go. They'll do the permits and the locals can't stop it. It was an effort to overturn that law. And but they apparently didn't get enough signatures because they just noted last week or a couple weeks ago that that it would not be on the 2024 ballot to overturn this local siting law. So really, that means there's not likely to be other questions on the ballot this year. So there'll be big questions about candidates, president, United States Senate, every member of Congress, every member of the House of Representatives, a couple Supreme Court justice races, Court of Appeals. There'll be a bunch of questions on people getting elected, but not ballot questions on issues before the people in this next general election. And that's a little bit unusual. Lately, there's always been something, seems like that makes its way. Technically, it's not too late, but it's getting awfully close.
Right, well, thanks for the update there. You can find the full article on our website, sbam.org. All right, so a few years ago, the state set a goal for public charging stations for electric vehicles. How's progress going?
This was there were a couple of different, you might remember a couple of different things. The goal was 100,000 charging stations or plugs around the state to accommodate up to 2 million electric vehicles. And then there was also this kind of novel idea of having a loop around Lake Michigan where you could drive all the way around Lake Michigan and there'd be charging stations the whole way. And so just last week, Bridge did a really nice kind of review of that goal that was set a few years ago, and how close are we coming to it. So 3 years ago, tens of millions of dollars that have been spent since then on this effort. Got about 96,000 to go on that 100,000 charging unit goal. So that is, so in other words, really not much progress made at all. And it really is a demand side issue. So there's a lot of kind of the feds and policy pushing and state government pushing to try to get things to go in this direction. The public is just not moving fast as fast as the public policymakers would have them move. So private investors have certainly been very slow to spend on charging stations. 335, an increase of 335 in the past year, making the grand total 1,446 stations with around 3,300 plugs. So to catch up, to make that goal by the end of the decade, it would take an addition of 47 new chargers per day in order to hit that goal. And there were 335 all last year. So that's just shows you it's not close. And given kind of the trends of what's happening in the industry, it seems like a pretty out of reach goal. Even if it could be reached, the utilization of the infrastructure would likely be so low that those that own and maintain them would have a difficult time cash flowing it.
All right, and University of Michigan published a report that highlights how difficult it's going to be to come up with enough copper to do some of this electrification work. So talk a little bit about that report.
Michigan historically has been one of the few places in the country where copper is actually mined. And so the U of M had really looked into all the known places where copper is either permitted to be mined or proposed to be mined, where it's feasible for that to happen through 2050, and how that matches up with the electrification goals. And the answer was that it's not feasible to have enough copper in order to pull it off, with at least with where we know that it is today. And it's the problem is that it's actually kind of in competition with, I mean, copper is used in so many different things. So in tech items, in refrigerators, in microwaves, and medical equipment, MRIs and X-rays, so there's a lot of things that currently are already use copper. And then we talk about battery production at the type of scale that electrification would demand. It's really kind of you'd consider electrification kind of the backbone of the federal government's decarbonization plan. And so this is going to be a real bottleneck in the future. So I thought the U of M study was pretty enlightening. I think common sense would tell you that this was going to be a bottleneck with how hard it is to get a mining operation permitted, and how it's just not enough copper to pull all of this off. What I found pretty interesting, though, was that it actually went so far as that, what are the options then to lower carbon production, but also realizing the difficulty in coming up with enough copper, and it's going to a tried and true technology that has made just an enormous difference, which is hybrid engines. So there's this kind of push toward getting things to where they're all electric, but there's a lot of evidence now that the overall carbon footprint, what it takes to produce a vehicle, and the feasibility and the efficiency of the vehicles, that hybrid vehicles really ought to be at least the intermediate stepping stone to accomplish some of these goals. Whereas the overarching kind of electrification of everything, either attitudes and exploration for mining and mineral exploration is going to have to change quite a bit, or you have to find other ways of increasing efficiency, reducing fossil fuel usage, which it's kind of right there in front of us, and hybrid technology that has been developed actually very substantially right here in Michigan. One other thing too that I think is just another kind of notch on the win side for Michigan when it comes to this, the disruption of electrification, we know will put a lot of auto workers out of business. Hybrid vehicles, though, it's different. It doesn't have the same type of impact. So to the extent that is the decarbonization moves away from kind of preferring all electric and goes more toward hybrid technology, the downside to Michigan of that transformation is muted very, very substantially.
All right, let's talk about Mexico. The US's largest trading partner has a new president.
We basically have a tie. It goes back and forth. Who's number one, Mexico or Canada? But with our tensions rising with China, both over the Trump administration and the Biden administration, it stands to reason that Mexico is going to become a much more important trade partner for the United States moving forward, and especially Michigan, with the way that the supply chain stretches across the entire continent, but right through the heart of Michigan. We have a lot at stake in what happens in Mexico. I just think it's going to become more strategically more and more important. And they had a presidential election over the weekend, and it was basically a landslide victory for the former mayor of Mexico City. Her name is Claudia Steinbaum, and she's a scientist, and it's a 6-year term. So we should consider this generally a status quo election. In other words, if this is in Mexico, you can only serve one term as president, and but they're longer term, 6 years. And in this case, it's a person who was the chosen successor of the outgoing president and a close ally. And of course, everybody does those jobs a little bit differently, but same party, chosen successor. So probably a fair amount of continuity in what's happening south of the border. So something I expect that will become strategically, it's always been strategically important for the United States, what happens in Mexico. In coming years, probably a little bit more. I did have a problem with, I actually had a few things I wanted to share today with, for Data Monday, and unfortunately had a tech issue. I just couldn't get the slides right. So we'll look forward to sharing some with you on Thursday. Some pretty interesting things that are happening out there. Again, crosswinds like we've been seeing for the last 2 years, where it's just really difficult to get your arms around what's happening with the U.S. economy. Some things that look really strong, other things that look really shaky. I found this week's data points to be particularly interesting. I look forward to sharing them with the audience on Thursday.
All right, great. Well, everybody be sure to tune in Thursday. And just a couple of plugs for some upcoming SBAM events. June is a really busy month. We're going to have our premier event, our Small Business Summit, on Thursday, June 13th. So if you're not registered yet, please do so in the next couple of days. We also have 2 webinars, one on the Fair Labor Standards Act changes. So if you want to make sure you're compliant, check that out. And another one on retirement mandates and what's happening with that potential. We also have 2 great owner-to-owner events, including one at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. So sbam.org/events for all the latest. And like Brian said, we'll be back here Thursday at 3 p.m. Have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Thursday.